Welcome to the Bi-Geekly Report, your bi-weekly take on queer representation in geek pop culture. I'm your host, Elle Sanchez. The last episode, we talked about gender-expansive characters and different geek mediums. Specifically, at some point, I mentioned Jadzia Dax, who is from Star Trek and from Deep Space Nine, to be specific. Jadzia is part of the Trill race, which is like a parasite that takes on different hosts, which means the gender can change throughout. But more specifically, in this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about Dax, but also how Star Trek as a whole has represented gender throughout their different TV series. Now, Jadzia is technically a queer character because the Trill, has attracted to whoever they're attracted to, it's depending on the host. So they are technically like bisexual, pansexual. Jadzia has been attracted to men and women in the series. So in that sense, the character can be queer. Although her gender and also her sexuality have not been handled very well in the Star Trek universe. Specifically, and this is why I would say that she's not necessarily a trans character, because when she is Jadzia, she previously, the previous character that she was, Curzon, I believe is how you say his name. Other characters in Deep Space Nine, they knew Curzon before. Curzon was Jadzia, and Curzon was male. And so they, have moments where, like, specifically Sisko, the captain of the ship, constantly refers to Jadzia as old man throughout the series because he remembers her as Curzon. And she doesn't seem to have an issue with that. And there are other characters she meets throughout that knew her as different people, as different hosts, and are a little more open to switching over. There's a really popular, it's not really a meme, it's just like sort of a picture that I recently shared that's a Cleon character meeting Jadzia, and he knew her as Curzon and says, hello, Curzon, my old friend. And she says, I'm Jadzia now. And he says, hello, Jadzia, my old friend, which is very sweet. Sisko took a while to figure it out. But in the same sense, I think that's because Jadzia is more of a gender fluid character than she is trans. So she's not having, don't know if those situations include misgendering necessarily, although, I'm not Jadzia. For her, they could be. She seemed to not have a problem with it in the show. While Jadzia being both queer and gender fluid is a big deal for Deep Space Nine and was great kind of representation, however poorly sort of handled, clearly written by probably cishet people, there are other examples of Trill talking about gender issues in the previous series, Next Generation, in which Beverly Crusher, the doctor of the ship, falls in love with a character named Odan. Odin? Well, Odin? It's not Odin. Odan, we'll say Odan. Odan, who is a host for a Trill, and they fall in love, and at some point, Odan becomes ill or injured, and the host and can no longer host the Trill, so it has to be moved to a different host, a cis woman. And Beverly Crusher, being a cishet lady, initially tries to reconnect with the person she loves, but then rejects her as a woman because she's straight, and she says some comment about how humans don't work like that or whatever else, which is clumsily handled and pretty stupid. The most problematic part of that specific episode isn't even necessarily what happens on screen. It's that later on, when different fans asked the creators about that episode and why they didn't choose, why Beverly kind of rejects her lover, and the director of the episode makes this terrible analogy in which he was like, it's kind of like if your beloved became a cockroach, could you love a cockroach? Boo. No. So luckily that shit wasn't on screen. There's also an episode in Next Generation that talks about the race known as the Janai, I think, or Janai. It really doesn't matter because it's fictional, but there's a character, I think it's Janai. But anyway, so there's a race called the Janai, which are agender and actually consider it a crime to identify as male or female, or I think even to be attracted to other men or like cis men or women. So in that episode, which is called The Outcast, there is a William Riker, number one, kind of, goes on an away mission with a member of the Janai. Her name is Soren. And I say her because during that episode, she kind of gets close, because everyone gets close to Riker for some stupid reason. But anyway, so of course, she gets close to Riker and admits to him that she actually secretly identifies as a woman and has since childhood, but she's afraid to say so because in her culture, it is a crime to identify in a binary sense or really as any gender at all. And so she not only admits that she has been has known she's a woman since she was born, but also that she's attracted to Riker, which is interesting, but also unfortunate because I feel like it adds that whole like Riker's such a man that he can turn everyone to whatever. But either way, and of course he handles it well by making out with her and all that. But at some point her people find out that this has happened, and she undergoes this procedure that all the people in her race undergo so they don't feel attraction to genders, and also so they feel, once again, agendered. It's this kind of psychological, I'm not really sure what the process is, but anyway, she undergoes that without consent. It's very sad, and then kind of rejects Riker at the end of the episode. So this is, again, like an interesting idea. Again, not handled great, but an interesting, sort of discussion on gender on TNG. It's kind of early at the time. So, it's kind of basically as close as we can get to sort of a discussion on being trans on sci-fi at the time that we could. The interesting juxtaposition between these episodes about gender in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine is that there is a Klingon character that I mentioned in Deep Space Nine that accepts Jadzia as Jadzia, and that's very lovely and beautiful. And then also in Next Generation, Worf, who is also Klingon, is the one that has, in the episode The Outcast, has major problems with the Janai not recognizing, being male or female. And he thinks it doesn't make any sense, and he kind of represents the bigoted, sort of transphobic person in that episode who later comes around and helps Riker to go, rescue Soren. And which is kind of interesting that they showed two different, not that everyone has to handle the same, but, the Klingons having a similar culture, but how each of them handle the situation having to do with sort of gender fluidity and stuff. Although I think at the end of the day, we can still agree that Next Generation is a better show than Deep Space Nine, even though Deep Space Nine did handle this better in general. TNG is a better show than Deep Space Nine, just across the board, I think. An important side note that as many Trekkies or Trekkers know that in Deep Space Nine, Worf actually was in a romantic relationship with Jadzia, which later ended in their marriage. There's a really good episode where they have a wedding that's all based on Klingon tradition. And side note, my second wedding completely based the ceremony on that episode. So if you want to know what my second wedding was like, you can watch that episode in which Jadzia and Worf get married. And yes, me and my ex did fight each other with batliths, in case you want. Can you think of more examples of Star Trek discussing sexuality and gender specifically in different series, maybe in Enterprise, because I don't watch that? Feel free to share so in the comments, and also be sure to like and share this video and subscribe. Thank you for watching Bi-Geekly Report. I've been your host, Elle Sanchez. See you later.